this might be kind of a loaded question. So, when it comes to you as an individual that organizes an animal advocacy group on a college campus, in terms of like your philosophy, what are some of the most important things to focus on? Is it direct one-to-one conversations on campus with individuals about animal rights? Is it educating ourselves as vegans and fellow activists, or some other third option I'm not thinking of?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll try to answer that as briefly as possible because I could go on for a while about that. I would say start with what do you think the goal is. So my goal, the big picture goal, is there's billions of animals being killed, exploited, used, commodified around the world, and we want to get that as close to zero as possible, the quickest way possible, and and the pathway of change. I most believe the way to do this is by having people in positions of power to make that change and then legislate over it in conjunction with a decrease gradually in consumer demand. So the way to do that is when you have college campuses at universities in places like the United States and top universities in food and agriculture and policy where these students are going to go into careers, you want to target students when they're young and open-minded and get them into careers that help animals, especially in neglected careers where you're almost like flipping cards. Like if you can imagine a board game where the goal of the game is like make a vegan world, and you've got politicians or doctors or journalists who have a lot of power and leverage in society, and then you can veganize them when they weren't already vegan before,
Mhm.
and then sending those out like that. That does a lot more than going into a career, or potentially does a lot more than going into a career where vegans were sort of already oversaturated in that position. So, for example, like me personally, I'm interested in like food systems and science communication as like my degree, and thought maybe it could be a good idea to go into like the communication and marketing side for all proteins. And I've also like learned more recently that those positions are often already saturated, and that either nonprofits like the Good Food Institute or cultivated meat companies they already have so many people in those positions. So what's neglected is areas of policy where people aren't already into animal advocacy and all protein. How that leads to what we do on campus is my goal is to create new vegans, and my goal is to find existing vegans and then get them to do something really important for their life for animals. And then also is to get people to go vegan and then do that too. So those two, three things. So the way we get people to um, go vegan on campus is if they have to actually come across the vegan message. So we'll have lots of posters about the moral urgency of veganism in conjunction with we'll do regular cubes like anonymous for the voiceless style. And we like those a lot. Those are sort of our bread and butter technique. We'll do those at least once a week. And we talked to over about 1,000 different people this semester, mainly students on campus. And then for the first time, they're being held accountable by a peer of theirs, a fellow student, about why they agree what they're seeing on the screen is wrong, but actually being held accountable that they're paying for it, and that to live consistently with their own values, they have to move away from that. That's really powerful. Then we'll have people come back 3 months later and say, "Hey, I went vegan from this. I want to get involved." Um, and we can connect them to people in the policy space, all protein space, and then eventually, their students are young and open-minded. Then, decades along the line, they can make a big difference for animals and decide, what trajectory they want to go on. So we'll have regular outreach with students, like registered student organizations. Will collaborate with climate groups, um, or social justice groups. We'll have like table or organization fairs at the beginning of the semester where all the clubs promote their stuff. So regular outreach in conjunction with making the dining halls go more plant based and have better plant based options. And the third thing is bringing education. So the fellowship program as well as guest speakers, or professionals to talk about the benefits of plant based eating for public health, personal health, and most importantly the animals, and also climate stuff as well. So sort of all areas of attack.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I think that was a great answer. When it comes to changing, like for example, the dining policy to something more plant-based, or just generally offering more plant-based items to individuals who eat plant-based, have you had any luck encouraging your school to adopt more plant-based dining behaviors, or no? And if so, or either way, what has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, I mean the two student organizations I'm involved with that help make the dining hall go plant-based, ASAP and the Alt Protein Project, we sort of made a conscious decision to focus less on the dining hall at UW Madison specifically. It doesn't apply to other schools, but UW Madison specifically for the reason is it was already not that bad. Obviously, the goal is that we have no animals, murdered and exploited for the dining hall, but there was already pretty decent plant-based options. I
Hell
don't
yeah.
think a vegan would have really big trouble. So that's why we focused our resources more on those other pillars of ASAP, the community outreach, developing the community, and the education, because the dining hall was already decent. That said, in a few semesters, I plan to ramp up the dining hall stuff more, gathering signatures and things for, hey, do you want better plant-based options? Show that there's demand and people want this sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so there's definitely I think other universities doing more work with that at the moment, but that's something you definitely want to leave that I have the doors ready open for in the near future.
Awesome. And then, like maybe on like a national, international level, do you think this is something that is worth us as vegans or advocates pursuing? Like I've seen in, I believe it may be just UK based, but there's something called plant-based universities, where it's some sort of
Yeah.
student-based organization that's like separate from just like the direct activism that we do, which is interested in getting universities and colleges to adopt fully plant-based dining halls. Do you think this is something worthwhile, or should we, or worthwhile to do kind of like in a sweeping manner, or should we focus on individual universities at a time?
I guess to understand your question, you're saying is plant-based dining halls as a campaign a good idea, or you're saying
Precisely.
is it a
Yes,
good
that's the word
idea?
I'm looking for. As a campaign.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely do think it's worth it. So, obviously when when we're talking on the street, students and stuff, and they'll say, well, this is sort of an excuse to still pay for animal products, they might say it's difficult or, that sort of thing. And obviously those, um, it may be true for some people, but it's also not justification for what we would do to the animals or their personal consumption. That said, the reality is, I think the biggest practical barrier for college students is likely not even recipes or taste or health or anything. It's probably social pressure.
Okay.
People are very like peer pressure to their groups. So if you can have plant-based dining halls where now your environment is morphed around you toward it's all plant everything, I think that's going to make it easier for people to naturally go in. So if you were to, I think every person who eats plant-based or is vegan on the dining hall or eats vegan on campus makes it easier for the next person to do so. Having, once you have a few vegan friends, all that sort of thing, it makes it much easier for you, especially on a college campus. So I think developing plant-based dining halls in conjunction with the positive feedback loop of all the other things. You want the activism going on, you want the posters, you want the educational events, you want it all happening. You don't just want to pick one so it doesn't lose momentum. Where it's all happening on a university, I think can be really good. And you want these small little communities of really high impact or high density animal advocacy, and then that can make a big punch. So I know they have a lot of focus, a lot of universities in the UK, and you can even see the UK vegan population like visibly increasing in front of your eyes. And I want the same thing for college campuses at the U.S.
I agree
and
with
around
that.
the world.
I have a
Yeah,
similar intuition that as a campaign, this is something worthwhile for us. Um,
yeah.
so
It's also like what's the trade off too? I'm not sure like there is
okay.
much of a trade
Yeah, I don't
off.
think so, honestly. I mean, the biggest trade-off is probably just be people being like, "Oh, I'd rather continue having our dining halls the way they are." It's not a very provocative or inflammatory position to take, just to want more plant-based dining halls. I'm
Right, and additionally, like people have to eat anyways, so it's sort of just
right.
like
Yeah, that much is convenient for
yeah,
us. Like, we convince people that they want to eat 3 times a day or something, right? Or we don't have
yeah.
to do that much of the work. One really interesting.
Also, real
Go
quick,
go ahead. Go
another
ahead. Go
small
ahead.
thing is like
Yeah.
meal plans can also be like, expensive and things, and plant-based food can be like cheaper, especially in bulk at like a dining hall.
Yes.
So you could like even advertise like, hey, you might not even have to pay as much for this, that sort of
Oh,
thing.
that's a great. Yeah, there you go. One thing I found really interesting is you pointed to social pressures being a hurdle for people when being plant-based or vegan or activists on college campus. Do you have any personal anecdotes regarding this as somebody who has gone vegan in college and advocates to people who are considering doing so? Are there any anecdotes that you have of people that may otherwise have been vegan, but just due to the social pressure that they were experiencing, chose not to, or what have you?
You're saying like they stopped being vegan because of that?
Or no, just never became vegan to begin with. Maybe they ran into the animal rights message at UW Madison and found it to be compelling, but because of social
Oh, I see.
ills, were never able to adopt it themselves. Have you ran into anybody that's told you this is the case?
Yeah, I mean, I went vegan in high school, and I didn't do much about it like in person in high school. But in terms of college, we talked to a lot of people in the street, and they'll say I'm very receptive to what you're saying, to your message. I get the point. I get that me buying these animal products is wrong. And then they'll say, but I'm a poor university student. I can't afford these plant-based products. If they might perceive it, if it's more expensive, and we know that in most circumstances that's not the case. It doesn't have to be the case. They'll say they don't like the plant-based dining hall options that already exist. And I think for most people who are serious about truly understanding the message, who aren't sort of trying to wiggle out of it, and I get that, it's you just got hit in the gut with this footage somebody told you. I get that, but I think if people do take it seriously, those sort of um, uh, things, those practical barriers, like the how to be vegan, sort of fall away when they understand the moral urgency, the why to be vegan. Um, and they really understand that like me not liking this meal 20% as much and this trivial taste pleasure isn't worth the violence that these animals go through. So I think anybody who's willing to take it very seriously doesn't fall victim to that, or they might originally fall victim to it, and then over time they'll overcome that.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Um, I'm gonna move on unless you wanted to loop back to anything that we've spoken to prior. I'm gonna move on to the questions that we have from the individuals that'll be listening later on.
All good. Punch away.
Awesome. So this first one is a bit mouthy, so bear with me. Um, and I quote, "There's so much information on the internet about the environmental and health effects of not going vegan, including the misinformed and propaganda-driven opinions. So my question first is how to differentiate between the factual data and the misinformed data, and secondly, how to show the data without upsetting the person whom we are communicating the facts about why there is this urgency to go vegan today." So, firstly, they're interested in about
Some of the
how when it comes to communicating as a science communicator, and this person's somebody who isn't. How is it that they should go about looking at all the information in front of them that they could utilize and getting somebody to understand the moral urgency of going vegan? Um, how can they assess this data and come to the correct conclusion or find sources that are actually factual in nature? What are some best practices in order to um, make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to arguing for veganism, I think what's going to ultimately convince someone is not necessarily a set of facts or factual information, but the sort of very simple elementary logic packed with like the emotional understanding that I'm being a hypocrite when I'm buying these products. And then if they have, qualms or concerns about practical things about the environment, personal health, actual things, and then how they can actually push through the information age when there's so much misinformation. I think one thing is it's going to be very difficult for you to become a domain expert in everything that you want to be or wish that you could. Um, and we're also fall victim to the Dunning-Kruger effect a lot. So I think is one thing is looking for people who share your same moral or similar moral values, but they make it very clear that doesn't conflict with their analysis of evidence and or evidence based on the matter. So, for example, you can find plenty of plant based doctors who ideologically are vegan and for the animals, where, at least in my understanding of the science, they give out medical information that is pseudoscience at best and harmful at worst
Got it.
some of the time. And then there are other ones who are very clear about how um, who seem to be more evidence based. Take like Dr. Matthew Nagro, I think is really great. You know,
Yes. We love
um,
Negro in this community.
yeah. So like he'll just say up that open up that I don't think we would have good reason to believe that on net that like low fat dairy causes increases the risk of cancer more than decreases the risk. It doesn't mean it's justified to eat dairy, or that like I don't think we have good reason to believe that fish increases the risk of heart disease. It may even decrease the risk of heart disease or fatty fish.
Hmm.
But again, it doesn't justify us eating it ethically or for the environment or some other thing. So I think when people are not so ideologically motivated where it clouds any of the evidence base, but they can still stick to their morals, I think that's typically a really good sign. Especially if they're also open to criticism, they're always open to debate, discussion about any topic related to evidence. I think that's really good. And then also credentialism. You want to stick to people who are talking about areas of their understanding of the science in their domain. So if somebody's a doctor, um, or like a cardiovascular doctor, and they're like trying to be an expert in like fighter planes or like cars. It's just, and you'll see this all over, where you'll see people who are neuroscientists or they'll experts in philosophy, and they try to branch out their domain expertise to other areas because they have that credential, and then it doesn't go out well for them. So I think that's something also to be careful of. Um, and then also just generally like not being extremely confident with all the claims you say or think you hold is probably generally good advice.
Okay. I think it's all really good advice. Thank you, Ryan. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to this next question. It's from a friend of mine, Track. The last question was from a friend of mine named Kartik. I just want to give people credit for the questions that they're asking as well. So Track asks, I'm curious as to which terminology for lab-grown meat gets the best response from carnists. Many cope when they hear the term lab-grown. I think it would be interesting to hear your view on this. Even more amazing if you have any empirics.
Yeah, I only really have the empirics. Like you could sort of like think of like what my personal opinion and what my guess might be, but we have data from surveys done either compiled or done by the Good Food Institute in one of their annual reports, which I could link you after this,
Please,
which talks
please.
about what people's intuitions and attitudes are towards the different types of names they'll call lab grown meat. So the new industry standard they adopted after finding this worked best with consumers, mainly vegan consumers, would be cultivated. People
Cultivated. I knew
feel
that was coming along.
cultivated. Yeah, people feel squeamish about lab grown meat. Cell culture media a little squeamish. They don't really know what that means. Um, so cultivated meat seems to be the best one. It's not perfect, but it seems to be the best one, and the industry's tried to really adopt that for PR purposes.
Fantastic. Yeah, if you could link that to me, I know Track would really appreciate it. Awesome.
Yeah, will do.
Um,
I can do that through Discord, but I know we've been mainly communicating over Instagram, but I can just hit you up from
yeah,
Discord from
either
now
one
on.
works. And then maybe we could, before we move on to any other questions, maybe you could touch a bit on uh, what Good Food Institute can offer us as activists, because I didn't even know that they were doing research like this on the market, such that we could understand, even as ourselves, as activists, how to communicate to other people about these things. Because like, if they're, if and I think we have decent reason to believe that their research is worthwhile in considering. If it's the case that saying cultivated meat is going to elicit some a greater percentage of somebody understanding veganism or accepting veganism. I think like that is a fantastic thing for us to be able to have at our disposal. What else or what in general does Good Food Institute offer to people, to activists, etc.?
Yeah, I would say the Good Food Institute they don't do any of their own like research in terms of there's somebody with a lab coat like experimenting with cultivated meat. What they do for the research is they formulate reports. So they're very connected with the startups in the cultivated meat industry, the plant-based industry, the fermentation industry, and then the donors and the nonprofits, and they make these annual or biannual reports about the state of the industry. How's progress going? What are the white spaces of research that needs to be filled in? Survey data. So they'll make these like published reports, and then in conjunction with that, lots of presentations come out of them. So all of this is free online at GFI's website, and there's just so many downloads of pre-made presentations you can give at your university, and they come with script and everything, and you can
Wow.
modify and make them your own. It's super helpful. Where the content's already out there, we just need people to communicate and be willing to listen. So, um,
That is
I
fantastic.
would definitely
That's a
look into
wonderful
that, and I can
partnership,
send
and
you that as well.
I've never even considered to be there for us. Good to know, and thank you for
Yeah.
explaining a bit about what in particular, or what particular role Good Food Institute has in the lab-grown meat space. Awesome. So the next question is from my best friend Risk. He asks, and him and I share a similar intuition on this. It seems to be the case that like l- proliferating lab grown meat and spending a lot of time, if not most of our time, lobbying for things like more plant based subsidies in the Farm Bill, things of this nature, seems to be like the most efficacious means of bringing about a world where animals are totally liberated. So why not dump all our money and energy into lab grown meat and lobbying? Risk asks.
Yeah. So two things I think, when we talk about putting all of our money there, the money going to lab grown meat for the vast, vast majority is not from the same money that is being competing with when we give money. Hey, does the animal advocacy movement give money to cage free campaigns with the Humane League or to ASAP or to vegan outreach? It's totally different money. The lab grown meat space, the adult protein space, the vast majority of the money is coming from private investors who don't have much of an interest in animals and are looking to get rich on a new technology who might have also some climate or environmental interests somewhere in the background too. So it's not really as much competing with the money in terms of what we focus on college campuses to get students involved. I think there's a trade-off there. Do we talk, to students and getting organized on students about animal rights? When you think of animal rights, or do you think of, doing things like going to careers in lobbying or politics or lab grown meat? I just say we do both, but I also don't think they have to be separate. If we can talk about the moral imperative of veganism and why we need lab grown meat, to help achieve that for those who are unreachable, I think those can go hand in hand. In terms of like policy and lobbying, I think, as much we could throw, if we had $1 billion to just lobby right now, I think that would work wonders. But I think, um, realistically, we also need to be the actual politicians to be lobbied to. So we need vegan lobbyists. We need people in positions of power in lobbying organizations to be vegan, but we also need senators, congressmen, congresswomen as well, state and local officials to have the animal's best interests in mind at the same time. So I just say if you're vegan, do something, dedicate yourself to something, because there's so many angles of attack. I often say this often, like why animal agriculture is so hard to tackle is because it impacts so many aspects of our lives. Eating food is personal. It's such an enormous industry. It has all these externalities. It's such a huge system. But the flip edge of that, the advantage of that, is we can attack it at so many different angles.
Awesome. Um, I would, I think, furthermore regarding that question, I think he's mostly interested in like essentially the American way of asking this question is what's the most bang for your buck in terms of philanthropy, right? Should, as somebody who has spent time in the effective altruist spaces, should we spend times on things that aren't necessarily related to animal rights advocacy, like or excuse me, money on things that are unrelated to the specifically to animal rights advocacy, like mosquito nets? Should we
Yeah.
donate to um, uh, organizations that are advocating or helping other individuals advocate for animals? Should we donate to well, I mean, it doesn't seem like your intuition lies within donating to lab-grown meat initiatives, and that we should rely mostly on private investors who are already interested, nonetheless, even if they're not motivated by animals. Where do you think our dollars are best spent as individuals, um, in particular, who are just interested in like influencing the moral landscape in the world of the world in a positive manner. So it doesn't have to be in particularly related to helping animal life, but just life in general.
I mean, the unsexy answers, it probably depends on your values a little bit. I can give some examples to that. So, if your primary concern is sort of animal welfare, how animals are feeling as we, um, holocaust them, then the most dollar for dollar effective thing you could be donating maybe to cage free campaigns or things like that. If you're convinced that, them feeling an 8 out of 10 suffering in their life to now a 6 out of 10 and then to be killed. Um, I mean, it's probably clear by the way I'm talking about it that that's not my view.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but that's something that I think likely fits their values. If you're not somebody who views animals in your moral community, then probably things like malaria research and mosquito nets is probably the best thing. And I've actually personally given money to that too, and I also care about animals, and that's my number one priority just in terms of scale and numbers and neglectedness. And then there's also, do we invest in terms of like helping animals right now, this second, or investing for the future to make a bigger difference in the future? So with ASAP, and that's the cause I most believe in and wish if I had any organization in the world I'd put my money into is ASAP. Then it's about investing for the future. We're creating these miniature communities on college campuses for animal advocacy to change the system to become, the system is just the sum of us as individuals. So to change the people in power, these people, this new generation of us who are going to be the leaders in all these different aspects of the world, and having an animal advocacy presence on college campuses, I think, is the most important thing. So I think, $1,000 to ASAP probably does more in the long term than $1,000 to Upside Foods. Not that they don't need the money, but I think more of that's going to come from things in the economy and investors who are not sort of animal advocacy interested, versus every dollar that we invest into making animal rights on universities a massive cultural movement. To me, I think that goes the longest way, big picture wise.
Okay. And I share a similar intuition. I think investing in the long term seems to be more efficacious for liberating animals than investing in the short term. Now, if we have an individual who is not utilitarian, right? So they're not interested in just like improving the welfare of individuals, but some sort of fundamental value that they hold towards animal life, such that like welfareism is just uh, like unacceptable to them. What initiatives would you suggest this person spend their money towards other than cage-free initiatives?
I think ASAP would be a good thing to spend the money towards. I mean, like ASAP is takes an abolitionist stance more or less. I mean, we work with people on the on the spectrum of abolitionism to welfareism across the aisle, but um, ASAP's goal is abolitionism, not a welfarist thing, and I think it's has the potential and is currently already pretty highly effective. So to me, it would be ASAP. Donating to ASAP.
All
And
right.
better yet, the donating, getting involved.
Getting involved, yeah, leading an org. Come on, guys. Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Um, all right, we got a series of questions from my friend who carries the username Alpha Sophist. So that should tell you quite a bit about him to begin with. So take a grain of salt with these questions. So here we go. Synthetic fur hasn't really stopped animals being killed for fur. I want to know how lab-grown meat would do better than any synthetic fur and their respective market share disruption.
Yeah. I'd actually be curious to see like the data on the amount of animals killed for their skin and for now between now and the introduction of synthetics, and then also not just to see if it's likely still gone up as there's more people and more people get lifted out of poverty and they can buy things like that, but if it would have been worse if it didn't exist at all.
Right.
So what I mean by that is, the current number of animals we slaughter for food keeps going up year by year. But if there were no vegans or there's no plant-based products, that likely could even be higher year per year. So there is an animal saved, even though it's still going up. But I'd be curious to actually see that if that gets linked or something. And there may be also market differences between cultivated meat as a replacement and synthetic fur. People who are into fur might have a preference towards their fur coming from an animal to a greater degree than they have the food in their mouth coming from an actual live animal. I also don't know if those synthetics where they are in terms of price parity, but they're probably good actually. It's just a guess, but those are all different factors to take into consideration.
Awesome. And then another question he has is a bit personal and quite the Hail Mary. So if you could answer this question, it'd actually be phenomenal. So Alpha Sophis asks, as a chemical engineer with skills in multi-phase reactor design, I would like to work in bioreactors for cultivated meat. What are the skill set that I need to have or even perceive a career of my interest?
Um, this is like pretty far from like my where I feel comfortable giving
Yeah, no,
advice.
no, no
But
problem.
I would say um, getting connected with people who could better answer that question in the all protein space, like the Good Food Institute, uh, is something important to do. And I would say, or can I ask this person back? What year are they?
Oh, absolutely. They, and this could be. I'll just type that down, and what we can do is like, just have like a personal conversation with this person after this one. So I can go back to them, like, what year are you, etc. Get you some more details because they are genuinely curious. They'd like to move into the
Yeah.
space after college. Um,
Yeah, the best thing I can do for them instead of answering the question is just give them people who can actually better answer that question. So,
awesome. That they would appreciate that then. Give
yeah,
me a second to note this down.
take your
All
time.
right. And then okay, this one I don't know if he was trolling you or what, but Alpha Sophist wants to know, Ryan Bloom, what is the definition of veganism?
No, that's a good question. I guess I could sort of give like a really short definition and then also like sort of a longer, more exact definition that you would give in like a formal debate instead of if I was just like talking to people. But my short definition is someone who's for animal rights.
Okay.
It's really short and sweet. And then like a longer thing would be veganism is like an ethical philosophy that it works in practice where you avoid inflicting negative rights violations on animals, or at least towards rights that are relevant to them.
Okay. And just to confirm, you are a deontologist, yeah?
I'm a threshold. Well, I think I most fall I most align with threshold deontology,
Okay. Was
though
there
it's not perfect.
any point that you held utilitarian beliefs or like entirely utilitarian beliefs?
I don't believe so. No. I mean, on like the spectrum of threshold deontology towards utilitarianism, I've sort of moved the needle a little bit. Probably a year ago, I was probably most at my closest point towards I'd ever been towards utilitarian, but I think I feel most comfortable in the threshold deontology label.
Can you touch more on that? What was going on a year ago such that you were the neither was closer to utilitarianism or shifting that way at
Yeah.
any in any capacity.
One also with the caveat, or I guess I'll say like a year ago, I was at an EA conference with a good friend of mine, Matthew Adelstein. He was at University of Michigan, and he's really really smart guy. He's a very strong utilitarian, and I wasn't able to refute his logic behind the reductios that I tried to run on him, but now I just don't even remember what they were, so I'd have to get in touch with him to hear his arguments again.
Fair
I
enough.
find it somewhat compelling. Um, so,
Dude, get him in
but I
here.
also know
I
he
love
changes
I
his
love yapping
too.
utilitarianism or utilitarians because I used to be. Excuse me, I apologize for cutting you off, but I find this to be really interesting. I used to be a utilitarian for a long time, and it really just comes down to reductios and how comfortable or compelling you find these reductios to be. I find myself flip flopping between threshold deontology and utilitarianism quite frequently. Um, so yeah, Matthew might be right up my alley in in terms of who to consult about my moral quandary.
Yeah, you may have seen his blogs before. They're called Bentham's Bulldog. He's a
Oh
pretty
shit, that sounds
angry.
familiar. I'm gonna look that up.
What was that?
I'm gonna look that up. Bentham's Bulldog.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, the next question I have is from one of my followers, Jordan. He's wondering, what's the process for getting a permit for demonstration usually like at universities?
Yeah, it totally depends on the university. I haven't really heard of it recalled to as like a permanent for demonstration, but typically, if you're just doing like outreach, whether you're doing like a cube or you're tabling outside or in a room or whatever, you like book the space with the university. So each university, if you're a registered student organization, there are rules custom to the university about booking space in advance and all that different stuff. It's also different if it's a public versus private university, so you just want to get familiar with the rules at your school. You can get familiar with the people there, like who run them, get friendly with them, and just things like that. Uh, but I mean, I don't really know of anything of like when people. We haven't done anything where there's intentionally trying to break laws or anything about time and place of where you can do demonstrations or activism. So, other than just checking with your rules of your university,
Okay,
you should be good.
perfect. And then this one I think is kind of a far-fetched question in my opinion because unless GFI or another institution has done the research, which is going to be based on your intuitions regarding this. The question is, how long until cultivated meat directly competes with conventional meat price-wise?
No idea, but um, my guess would be somewhere a really big range of in 10 to 40 years.
10 to 40 years. And
That's my big guess, if at all.
yeah, no problem. And I think I have a similar intuition. As somebody, you as somebody who's a bit more read and versed on the lab-grown meat space, what do you think would be the entailments um, of of lab-grown meat being at a price parity with conventional meat?
Yeah, I think that most people when they're surrounded by it and it's at price parity or even a little bit cheaper, that sort of thing, um, will start buying it pretty soon. We have decent data on like the amount of the population willing to have cultivated meat. Um, and I also think that data is based off of the fact that would you eat this in the future? Not it's already surrounded by you at the grocery store for cheaper and tastes all good and all this sort of thing. So it's probably even an underestimate.
Gotcha. That's
And then
fantastic.
I think the consequences of that, I think the most immediate consequence is that places that adopt it, like in wealthier countries, like such as in the West, in the U.S., or maybe in Singapore and Western Europe, the slaughter of animals in the animal holocaust will be decreased in those areas, and then will take longer for infrastructure to develop for areas in the global south or places like India and China to move along with that. I think the environmental benefits, I think things like atmosphere temperatures and things like that from greenhouse gas emissions from methane from cows won't really be seen much at all with the adoption of lab grown meat in the beginning because it's a little bit too little too late. Um, in terms of just lab grown meat specifically. What I do think is you'll probably see cleaner waterways, less risk of zoonotic disease, not disadvantaged communities getting struck with just huge waste pools of animal waste, um, less land use for agriculture and reforested, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And lots of conspiratorial misinformation.
Oh man. Yeah, that'll do it. Um, all right, Ryan, that's all of the questions that I have from other individuals. We can go on. I think I have a couple questions myself and just like personal things that I'm curious about that will come and go here. So, I think one of the first things is
Yeah.
like are there any like what I would consider to be like niche subtopics within um what I consider to be like the vegan like sphere of influence,
Yeah.
such as wild animal suffering. that you find particularly interesting?
Yeah, depending on like people's definition sort of veganism, things like wild animal suffering and what to do about it could either be an issue that has to do with veganism because it logically extends to um, past human oppression animals, but also just animal suffering in general or animal on animal oppression. Or it can be something that has nothing to do with veganism, but I still care about as a separate issue. I'm comfortable talking about it in either way. Um, but it makes sense to me that somewhat that animal rights comes from a logical extension of human rights. Why I care about animals comes from my intuitions of why I care about humans. They're similar in the ways that morally matter, and that also I see no reason to believe that doesn't also include wild animals in my moral circle. So just the mere location or the naturalness of something of where suffering or rights violations occur shouldn't dictate, at least inherently on a moral sense or a philosophical sense, what we do about it, other than maybe practical barriers for competing norms or competing problems. So I do think we should take wild animal suffering seriously. I think if we have good reason, and I'm not sure we do have good reason, but if we find a good reason to believe that insects suffer greatly or have the capacity to suffer. I think that wild animal suffering, from a pure suffering perspective, has the ability to surpass the suffering in animal agriculture, um, or even the rights violations there. What we do about it is a more difficult question.
That is the next question. What do we do about it? What do we do about wild animal suffering?
Yeah, I think it's something that you have to probably play your cards with very carefully. I mean, the organization working on it now, Wild Animal Initiative and Animal Ethics, they're in their like research phase, which I think is a good idea because we want to figure out ways to actually measure how animals feel in the wild, just in general, better measurements, so we actually know when we do interventions in the future, if we do interventions in the future, are we actually making a positive difference, as opposed to doing more harm than good. So right now they're mainly in the research phase. They've done small little interventions, on urban populations, take pigeons or rats in terms of giving them contraceptives instead of so they don't overpopulate, instead of the overpopulation of them dying slowly in glue traps or other things. And I think generally those things are very good by intention and probably good by outcome. We just want to make sure we're doing things good with the outcomes, just sort of being very careful. And it's something that for people who are not in the vegan community may be a little bit like taken back of or just not understand. I think that's something we need to be careful and cautious of. Not that means we shouldn't talk about it or shouldn't be working about it. I just think that's something to be very considerate of.
Fantastic. Yeah, that much I agree with. And so, personally, I think we have no choice but to talk about this in a very liberal fashion and consider the contentious and hard to come to a moral conclusion of questions such as ought we kill animals that are likely to predate on prey animals?
Was that a question, sir?
Yes.
Um, could you repeat the question? I
Sure.
only heard the prey animals at
Yeah.
the end.
Ought we kill predator animals in order to prevent them from
Hmm.
violating the rights of prey animals?
Yeah, I'd say like philosophically, I'm very much convinced that the moral thing to do is if you have an animal in the wild that is violating the rights of other animals in a really, really bad way, and to lots of other animals take certain predators in the wild, then the right thing to do, the most moral thing to do, is if you have no other choice, is to kill them. And I think that's most cases for certain predators. That said, I don't know the ramifications for that. I'm not comfortable knowing the ramifications for that yet because there's no real empirics. So my intuition is in some instances you could get away with killing carnivorous animals or murdering carnivorous animals and it being a good thing to do. I'm just not convinced that as a policy that it is yet. It could sort of, I guess, go either way. Um,
Okay.
but I mean, this stems from the very fact that like if we had human beings in the wild animal scenario and there was just like predatory beings just like ripping apart humans alive and our choice is to let that happen in perpetuity versus actually doing something about it. Um, I would hope that if I had any solution, it would be a solution where we could keep the predators around but not have them harm the prey animals. But if the only solution is to kill them in that very moment, then morally that is the unfortunate but best thing to do.
Okay. Now, there's some um implications of killing prey animals and human beings being human beings that I consider to be like some sort of like gray area depending on your view. But there's some vegans who believe not only should we kill predator animals in order to save prey animals, but that there's no moral quandary in then consuming the corpse of that predator animal. What are your intuitions regarding this?
I think in like a moral vacuum where there wasn't externalities that come from it, like consuming the dead animals that were culled to protect these prey's rights is like not a problem.
Hmm.
Um,
I agree,
like
by the way.
I don't place any value on like post mortem rights, at least for unless humans told me before, at
Got it.
least inherently. Um, that said, if there was data that showed that um, eating lions or some other animal that was killed to protect the rights of prey animals after the fact hurt the animal advocacy movement for some other reason, then I could be convinced out of it. I just don't have any data on that.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, I think this is essentially why it's like gray. Well, it's gray for like I think a multifaceted reason. There's people that just don't accept the idea that postmortem rights are kind of a joke. That an individual does not have a right to their corpse once they have no moral claim, which stems from consciousness, presumably. And then secondly, I think people just have like or excuse me, an intuition that to consume the bodies of dead animals means or has some negative connotation for the movement and as an extension for animals. Uh,
Yeah, like I some people try to say like would you bite the bullet on like if there's a human being who died and then like somebody ate their dead body so why would you do that for the animals? It's like disrespectful and it's like well it's pretty gross and I wouldn't recommend it for a lot of reasons, but like purely morally, um in a vacuum, I don't see there's anything wrong with that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I have similar
Wouldn't be
views.
my thing personally, but
Yeah, no free humanism instead of freeganism, huh?
yeah.
Is there awesome, thank you so much, Ryan. Are there any other niches like this within veganism that you spend your time thinking about?
Bit in the EA community, like existential risk, was I think because of the wild animal thing, and for other obvious reasons, like if humans were to go extinct, that'd be really, really bad because, or the most possible worst bad thing because, um, then you have this moral emergency in wild animals continuing to suffer greatly in perpetuity, with no chance of an intelligent species being able to undo that. That to me sounds really, really bad. So preventing ourselves from going extinct from artificial intelligence, unaligned artificial intelligence, nuclear war, pandemics, all these other things. So I spend a little bit of my time reading up on that and getting myself familiar with the arguments because I care about that. And if the animal advocacy problem didn't exist, like there was already a vegan world, I'd probably be spending my time on like preventing um, spread of nuclear weapons or artificial intelligence safety.
As somebody who's like completely unfamiliar with this sort of thing, and I'm sure that'll be the case for my viewers, what can you tell us about existential risks? Why ought we care about them? What can we reasonably do in the face of them? And what are some of the most threatening existential risks to our awareness?
Yeah, so defining existential risk, and there's lots of different ways people define it. It's a bit of a is a sort of a buzz term, but buzzword. But I would define it as um uh, an event or series of events that would either wipe out all of humanity or a significant portion of humanity and harm our infrastructure, where it would set us back, like technologically, generations and generations to maybe a point of no recovery.
Got it.
So That could look like a nuclear war. That could look like a pandemic that spreads as much as COVID does, but instead of having although as deadly as it was, a small fatality rate like the Black Plague, either a bioengineered or a pandemic coming from our use of animals in terms of zoonotic disease. Though I think that's less likely to be hyper deadly. Um, it could look like climate change, so I think that's a little bit more of like a slow strangle. I'm pretty convinced that like climate change is not going to end us all or anything. It could just make life very, very, very difficult. um, and also exacerbate other existential risks like human conflicts, tension, and zoonotic disease as we encroach on wild habitats. Um, Another one, antibiotic resistance, and most of our antibiotics, go to feed off farm animals, so that would be sort of the end of modern medicine, and that could put us back severely and kill millions, hundreds of millions of people. Um, so those are some existential risks, and the fifth one, or another one, could be unaligned AI. So if you're not read up sort of at all about the space, it could be a little bit harder to describe, but it stems from the very notion that if we're creating intelligence machines that are vastly smarter than ourselves and quicker than ourselves at thinking, and if you just take information and being smart as like just information processing, it doesn't AI doesn't have to be sentient or even have intentions at all, as long as it has a goal that is unaligned even the littlest bit with ours. Then, and if it's so much more powerful than us, we could just go extinct by accident. So if you sort of think like people, if you're walking on the sidewalk, especially if you're not vegan and you're walking on the sidewalk and there's like ants on the ground and you're not paying attention, you just accidentally step on the ant, but your goal on the sidewalk wasn't to step on as many ants as possible. You just happened to step on the ants because they were in your way. That's sort of how like super intelligent AI could treat us if its goals were unaligned with ours. So I think there's a serious possibility of that happening sometime. It doesn't have to be next month or next year in our lifetime, but I think as we continue to improve upon our intelligence machines at an increasing rate, and our institutions are lacking the ability to regulate it, and have fallen behind, that poses a serious risk. So what do we actually do about these things? And that comes back to the same thing with the animal stuff, is taking these seriously by getting involved. So we need people in power to make the decisions to um, either, if we had all the world leaders or a significant portion of world leaders who are anti-nuclear war. Well, I mean, they're anti-nuclear war now, but anti-having that many nuclear weapons at a time, that sort of thing. We're not having communication about them. Um, and that takes decades and decades of cultural and political movements to even get started there. That's a bit of a difficult one. Talk about AI safety, um, the vast majority, like 80, 90% of money going into the AI space is not for safety. It's for just pure innovation. So if we can switch the amount of people going into careers, the amount of startups, the amount of people working on AI safety, that can be really huge. So the same thing goes for all these other existential risks and suffering areas that have nothing to do with animals necessarily.
Okay. Um, a philosophical subject that is adjacent to veganism that I have found interest in and have found interest in for reasons being that other activists seem to be susceptible to accepting this idea, is antinatalism. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, yeah, just what your general thoughts are regarding it. If it's some sort of threat to us as animal rights activists, or if it's benign in nature, etc.
Yeah, I'm currently, and I've remained for a few years, pretty unconvinced by antinatalism.
Mhm.
Um, I think human beings, there's sort of like there's a really big spectrum of they can do like the worst of the worst and also the most potential to do the best of the best of the universe. Um, so maybe it's just because I'm an optimist and I have ambitious goals that I see human beings as the tool that we need. So us going extinct is a really bad thing. And I know there's a degree to which antinatalists believe, we should not be having children and not procreate. But I just remain pretty unconvinced. I think we need human infrastructure to accomplish at least my goals and a lot of it, and that more people living good lives isn't a bad thing. We just need to make sure we're not causing rights violations to others in the process. I think vegans personally, or like vegans specifically, should be pumping out babies, like breeding rabbits, like many,
Yes,
many like,
dude.
vegans as
Okay,
possible.
that's what I love to hear, man. Yes,
Yeah.
I share that position.
And you know when you have children like as a vegan, like there's no guarantee your child's still gonna be vegan when they grow up, but the chances is so much higher. And I think in the long term, even if that person doesn't become vegan, they commit rights violations to animals, the higher chance, the over 50% chance or whatever, that they are vegan and are another vegan in the world to make long term change in the future is really good. I mean, we see this in other movements like Mormons and other and other either
Yeah.
religious, ethnic social movements, like them having so many kids is trickles down to why they have so much influence and power. So I think vegans especially should be having lots of kids if they choose to. Obviously, if you don't want to be a parent, you don't want kids. Having kids ought to be the worst possible thing.
Yep.
If you're a parent, and you don't want a kid, so obviously don't do that. But I wouldn't restrict yourself so quote unquote morally speaking, in my view.
Okay. Another uh subtopic of veganism I find personally interesting is dystopia. Seems to be the case that a lot of our fellow activists fall victim to like a depressive view of the world and a depressive view about our trajectory as animal rights as an animal rights movement. Do you have any personal anecdotes of dealing with dystopia, and or how would you advise somebody who is dealing with dystopia and not seeing w- what we seek out to do as activists as like something that can be effective or is frustrating because it's not currently effective?
I actually didn't know the term dystopia, which actually probably answers the question of how much it affects me.
So dystopia is coined by
Yeah.
a vegan psychologist, and it's this idea that there's some incongruency with the world that vegans feel as a result of no longer consuming animal products and living amongst individuals who see animals as a means to an end. And these individuals suffer as a result of this. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think a lot of it comes down to like naturally born personality traits. I mean, our environment definitely can affect how we feel, our optimism, how down we feel, how motivated we are, how much discipline we are to keep pushing. But I think a lot of it comes down to like specific personality traits we're sort of born with a little bit.
Surely.
So I was fortunate to be somebody who sort of can just keep plugging away even when it all looks really bad. Um, but I definitely know it affects a lot of people. I know lots of people very close to me in the analysis movement where hopelessness, defeat, um, overwhelmed by the force and strength of these evil industries really punches them down. And I get that, and I'm there sometimes. So fortunately, I don't deal with that typically long term. Um, and but I think we should try to only worry about things that we can control. And this is something that we can control. We can't press a button and end it, but we can work our butts off for our entire lives to try to. So
Mhm.
um, I would do that. And then also, I think something that helps me a little bit is like I'm not convinced of free will.
Yes! Oh my God, Ryan!
Philosophically,
Ryan, let's
yeah,
go! Dude, why are you just like me for real?
yeah, we're very similar. Similar views. So like that helps a little bit when you're dealing with like, lack of a better term, like harness stupidity. Sometimes it's just like
Ah,
you're. It's almost not personal, and nothing's personal at the end of the day.
legitimately. And neither is our
Nothing's
like
personal. Nobody deserves anything. It's just we're here existing the universe.
I think that's like the advice that I'd give that like our progress, lack thereof, our like confidence in veganism or animal rights or lack thereof, literally just like it's not personal. Like it shouldn't be like some interpersonal issue that or I genuinely believe that it shouldn't be some interpersonal issue that gets you down because it's out of your hands. You're not responsible for or culpable for the lack of animal liberation, right? Like all we can do, I think the some great advice is to put your head down and plug away at the problem. because that's going to push a needle forward towards animal liberation as opposed to anything else, in my view.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
I think just to wrap things up, as kind of like an
Yeah,
action
I got a
point.
few minutes.
Yep. How should individuals get involved with GFI, or ASAP? In particular, I'm very interested in ASAP. How should people, especially college students, go about getting involved?
Yeah, so the way people get involved with Good Food Institute as students mainly is through their all protein project. So it's like their GFI does a bunch of stuff, but one of their big things is like university community building with the all protein project run by students. So there's them all around the country, all over the world. So every March um, you'll send in an application to them, um, uh, and there's like a review process. Are you a good fit to have an all protein project at your university? And the reason they have a vetting process because there's grant money, they have to actually invest in you. So then, once you get accepted through a couple of rounds of interviews, then you take a training program over the summer, um, and you become an all protein project, and you get all their support, and you come to, you get virtual meetings and all these different things, and it's really great. So if your school, I mean, any school, but especially a school that has something to do with food innovation, um, or addresses the outcomes that all proteins is trying to address, like environmental things, internally, obviously for us animals, I think it's definitely worth looking into. And then for ASAP's biggest boundary right now is just getting the resources to support more schools. So generally, we get more requests from serious animal advocacy students than we can actually like get an ASAP chapter two. So we just need more money and more funding to hire more people, and work longer hours to actually get chapters up and running from people who are like begging us to help us get a chapter, an ASAP chapter. So um, getting involved with ASAP is definitely good. Submitting their application there to get a chapter. I can also connect you with the people in ASAP like Dr. Frost Orsini and Benny and others about how we can mentor and train and get ASAP chapters going. Um, but also figuring out ways to get ASAP more money so we can actually do the campaigns that we want to do is really important because everything's set up and ready to go. We literally just need people to make it happen, and to get people to make it happen, we have to a lot of times pay them. So
Awesome. And then for individuals who aren't currently enrolled in college or have already graduated, how can they contribute?
yeah, absolutely. If you're still on your university and you're a graduate student or you've graduated, but you're still, in the city where the university, you can still get involved in everything. You can still, do the outreach, come to the events, do all those sort of things, just be hands on. And then, but if you're not, if you're like totally away from the university or that sort of thing, and you're like out of college and you're mid late 20s or whatever, or even any other age, um, there may be less you can do directly for ASAP and the Good Food Institute and like all protein project, but there's still so many things you can do. So even just bringing like even if you have a job or an occupation that has like nothing to do with animals and you can't make it to do with animals, you can sort of bring the animal advocacy culture to your workplace, um, whatever it is, to the best of your ability, and just speak out, do social media outreach, label things at grocery stores, leaflet, posters, stickers, have conversations, do anything. If you can just commit yourself, hey, my goal this year, it's just one thing this year. I want to make somebody vegan. I want to make an actual person who's dedicated for animals, going vegan for life. Just one person a year. You have 365 days to do it. And you do that every year, and the person you do that to did that every year. In theory, we'd have a vegan world in like a decade. It's not going to happen that obviously that quickly, because that's a very difficult thing to do. But if you can just even commit yourself to say, hey, I just got to get one person to be vegan this year, as a goal, I think that's always something you can look forward to do.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ryan, for this conversation and that answer. Were there anything else, or was there anything else that you wanted to touch base on before we wrap it up and call it a call?
No, I just would say that person who wanted to send me the data about um, fur, synthetic fur, and fur. I'll send you. I'll DM you that GFI data about consumer acceptance of. Was it consumer acceptance of cultivated meat? Oh
Yes.
no, no, it was
In
cultivated meat is a
particular,
term.
the what name
terminology.
terminology? Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, and I
And
think
then I would
that.
also
Go ahead.
oh, you sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just say you can get in contact with me through Discord, though I'm not super active there, or my Instagram Ryan.Blum11 BLUM is Blum Ryan.Blum11. I'm available there. Um, and I can connect you to anybody in the ASAP space, likely the Good Food Institute space, or just general animal advocacy movement building on communities. That's what I'm here for. And just always use your voice. The animals need every minute we can spare for them, and we need all the heroes we can get. So thank you for having me on, and keep doing what you're doing, and all those listening as well.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for being a hero. The animals do need every single last one of us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
All right, take it easy, brother. I'm gonna hop off for now, and I'll be in touch when the video is done.
Yeah, take care, bro.
Bye bye.
See ya.
See ya, buddy. Let's go.